Hi, I'm Natalie Brooks, and this is the story of how I gave everything my time, my heart, my life to a company I didn't even name, only to be told I'd never be good enough to lead it. It's the story of how I walked away empty-handed, but returned with everything. But let's go back to the beginning, when all we had was a drafty old building and a shared dream. Our family business, Brooks Freight Solutions, was born from my grandmother's post-war hustle and my father's relentless determination. It began as a tiny courier service in Minneapolis with 2 delivery vans and a single phone line that barely rang. By the time I was a teenager, it had grown into a small but thriving logistics company serving regional warehouses and independent retailers across Minnesota. From the outside, it looked like a classic American family success story. But on the inside, it was clear. The future was already written for my older brother, Ethan. Ethan was the golden child. My dad always said he had the gift of business, just like Grandma did. He was charming, confident, and could command a room full of executives with ease. I, meanwhile, was the quiet workhorse, the planner, the strategist, the one buried in spreadsheets while Ethan played golf with potential clients. When I graduated from the University of Minnesota with degrees in supply chain management and information systems, I didn't want to just inherit the business. I wanted to transform it. I envisioned a smarter, faster, more efficient operation. But Dad didn't understand most of what I suggested back then. Why fix what's not broken? He'd mutter when I pitched automation tools and data analytics. Still, he gave me space, a desk in the back office, and the freedom to run small tests. And those tests worked. In the first year, I cut operating costs by 18% by redesigning our routing system. By year 2, I led a full digital overhaul, moving us off paper logs and whiteboards to cloud-based fleet tracking. For years in, we secured contracts with 2 major national retailers. By my late 30s, we'd grown from a $3 million company into a $60 million logistics force. But no matter how much progress I made, I was always just Natalie in operations, the person who kept things running, never the one on center stage. Ethan had left for a few years to chase his own startup dreams, which failed, but when he came back, it was like nothing had changed. He walked through the office doors and was greeted like a war hero. Dad hugged him tight, handed him a corner office, and named him Vice President of Business Development. I bit my tongue. Maybe he'd grown up. Maybe we'd finally work as a team. But I was wrong. Ethan took credit for contracts I secured, talked over me in meetings, and tossed out little jabs. Natalie's great with numbers, but leadership's a different game. I kept my head down, hoping the results would speak for themselves. But I was naive. The final blow came on a chilly Saturday evening at Dad's 60th birthday party. We were at the old Italian place we'd been going to since childhood, red leather booths, checkered tablecloths, and the same waiter who knew us all by name. I had a hunch something big was coming. Dad had been dropping hints for weeks. When dessert arrived, Dad stood up and tapped his wine glass. He spoke about legacy, about how Brooks Freight had survived decades of change through hard work and grit. I smiled softly, hoping for at least a nod of recognition. Then he said it. "It's time to pass the torch to the next generation," Dad announced, beaming. "And there's no one more prepared to lead us into the future than Ethan." For a moment, the words didn't register. From now on, Dad continued, Ethan would serve as CEO. Dad would remain chairman, but the future belonged to his son. Not a single mention of me. I sat frozen, fork resting on my untouched slice of cake. Around the table, Ethan smirked, my aunt dabbed her eyes proudly, and my mom, quiet, as always, gave a small, tight smile. Dad turned to me at last. "Natalie," he said warmly, "you'll keep your role in operations, of course. You're our rock. But leadership, well, it's just not where your strengths are. You're dependable, but you're not a visionary." And then came the line that burned into my heart. "You'll never be good enough to run this company." The table fell silent. I stood slowly, placed my napkin on the table, and gave a soft nod. Thanks for the clarity, I said quietly. Then I walked out. No shouting, no drama, just quiet dignity and 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. That night, I packed up my office without a word. But I didn't disappear. I went to build something of my own. And 5 years later, I would come back, not as the overlooked sister, but as the woman holding the keys to everything they thought was theirs. The night my father announced his big decision, it was as if time slowed. We've weathered every storm, pulled through with grit, and built something truly lasting, he said, smiling warmly. I leaned forward, hoping for even a small nod of recognition, maybe a shared role, maybe just an acknowledgement of all I had done. But then he spoke the words that shattered any illusion I still clung to. It's time to pass the torch to the next generation, he declared, pride glowing in his eyes. And no one is more ready to lead us into the future than Lucas. For a moment, I sat frozen. The name barely made sense to me. Lucas? My brother, the one who had left to chase business ventures that fizzled, who returned only when things were already running smoothly. Dad kept going, his voice brimming with excitement. Starting today, Lucas will be stepping in as CEO. I'll stay on as chairman, but Lucas is the future. Not one mention of me. I sat quietly, my fork resting on a slice of untouched pie, my heart pounding in my chest. Around the table, Lucas wore that familiar, self-satisfied grin. My aunt beamed proudly, my mother sat quiet, fingers nervously twisting her napkin. Then Dad turned to me. Sarah, he said, his voice gentle, you'll continue in operations. That's where you shine. You're steady, dependable, but you're not the visionary type. And then came the sentence that would echo in my mind for years. You'll never be good enough to run this company. The table fell still. No one moved, no one dared to meet my eyes. I rose slowly, laid my napkin on the table, and managed a calm nod. Thank you for the clarity, I murmured, then walked away. No tears, no scene, just quiet dignity and the storm raging inside me. That night, I packed up my office. I didn't call anyone. I didn't leave a message. I just left. But I didn't vanish. I had something far more powerful than they realized: experience, relationships, and knowledge. And I was going to use it. As I walked out of that dinner into the cool Denver night, the air felt sharper, colder. But the chill wasn't in the wind, it was in me. Something inside had frozen over, hardened. That night wasn't just the moment I was pushed out. It was the moment I understood that no amount of loyalty or hard work would ever make them see me as an equal. Lucas hadn't earned his seat. He'd inherited it. I could have doubled the company's worth, and it still wouldn't have mattered. Not to my father, not to the board, not to the people who saw me as nothing more than a backstage operator. So, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I went home, opened a bottle of wine, and sat in the dim glow of my laptop. On the screen was the Brooks Freight logo, a brand I had helped shape, nurture, and grow. I stared at it for a long moment, then opened a new folder. Project Summit. That night, I began to sketch out what would rise from the ashes they left me in. The following morning, I went back to the office, not to burn bridges, but to gather what I needed. Quietly, I backed up the files I had full rights to, the financial reports I'd written, the client lists I'd built, the vendor contacts I had cultivated over years. I even photographed the strategy boards I had spent countless nights perfecting. 2 days later, I submitted my resignation. No dramatic speech, no confrontation, just a simple letter on Dad's desk. Thank you for the opportunity. Wishing you continued success. That was all. Dad never responded. Lucas sent a one-line email, best of luck. I doubt he even meant it. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I was walking away ready. Summit Freight had become known for its honesty, its top-tier routing technology, and just as importantly, the way we treated every member of the team, from drivers to dispatchers. Industry publications were praising our approach, but what made me the proudest was knowing that every single dollar we earned came from our own hard work. Not 1 cent of Brooks Freight's money had built this. So when the call from Lucas came, I knew exactly what it was. Not just a casual check-in, but thinly veiled worry. "We've been thinking about expanding west," Lucas said, trying hard to sound breezy. "Might be room for some collaboration." I let a pause hang in the air, then answered smoothly, "We're already operating in the West, but I appreciate the thought." There was a brief shuffle on the line. "Oh, well, that's great to hear," he muttered, his confidence faltering. What Lucas didn't understand was that while he was busy dazzling the board with polished presentations and fancy projections, I was busy doing something far more powerful, quietly building real influence. In logistics, everything comes down to relationships, and the strongest ones are born from trust, not contracts. Over the last couple of years, several former Brooks Freight clients had come over to Summit. Not because I poached them, not out of spite, but because they chose to. And among them were some of the most high-profile accounts in the region. But the real shift was happening in the background, where few were paying attention. Brooks Freight had recently aligned itself with a major corporate partner, Hudson Ventures, a publicly traded conglomerate known for snapping up mid-market companies to expand its portfolio. The idea was to help Brooks stabilize, bring in fresh capital, and break into new markets. But what Lucas and Dad hadn't noticed was the ticking time bomb behind that deal. I learned about it through a former Brooks account manager who had joined our team. One day, leaning against the doorframe of my office, she dropped the news casually. "Hudson Ventures is restructuring," she said, arms folded. "Brooks Freight is on the short list to be divested." At first, I hesitated. Did I really want to step back into the world I had fought so hard to break free from? The world that had underestimated me, belittled me, and dismissed me as a background player? But then I thought of my father's face at that dinner table, the pride he had when crowning Lucas the heir, the dismissive way he called me dependable but not leadership material. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't about revenge. This was about setting the record straight. Leadership isn't about titles or press releases. It's about the work done in the shadows, the faith you earn when no one's looking, the resilience you show when things get hard. So, I made the first call, then another. And within days, I was sitting across from the executive board of Hudson Ventures in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. No fancy logos, no entourage, just me, a navy pantsuit, and a polished acquisition proposal. "I'd like to purchase Brooks Freight in its entirety," I said calmly, sliding the documents across the table. "We're ready to take on their obligations, honor current contracts, and offer retention packages for critical staff." One executive raised an eyebrow. "You don't anticipate challenges, given your history there?" I allowed myself a small, measured smile. "On the contrary," I said, meeting their eyes. "My history is exactly why this will succeed." After 90 minutes of negotiation, we reached a preliminary agreement. The due diligence process would take time, but the direction was clear. Brooks Freight was about to change hands, and this time, I was the one holding the reins. I didn't announce it right away. I let the papers settle, let the news cycle gear up, let the board handle informing Dad and Lucas. And then, on a cool and drizzly Friday morning, I saw the email from Hudson Ventures' legal team hit my inbox. "Transaction complete. Welcome aboard." I sat quietly, staring at those words. There was no burst of triumph, no punch there moment. Just a quiet, steady peace, as though something heavy had finally slid off my shoulders. The woman they once dismissed as a dependable side player had just bought the very company that cast her aside. And the best part was they never saw me coming. The next day, I walked through the familiar glass doors of Brooks Freight for the first time in 6 years. Same walls, same chip tile by the front entrance, same black and white photo of Dad shaking hands with the governor, slightly crooked in its frame. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes widening slightly. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I replied with a warm smile. "Please let Mr. Brooks know his new employer would like a word." Her mouth parted in surprise, but she quickly lifted the phone. As I waited, my heart stayed steady, my hands loose at my sides. This was the part one had waited for, the moment that belonged to me. The elevator ride to the top floor felt oddly surreal. I had made that trip countless times before, always juggling a laptop and a half-drunk coffee, ready to handle another fire. Back then, I was the behind-the-scenes fixer, the one they called when things went wrong, and the one they forgot to credit when things went right. But today, I wasn't climbing the tower to put out flames. Today, I was stepping into the role I had earned long ago. The elevator doors opened with a familiar chime. The hallway stretched before me, unchanged, the same beige carpet, the same flickering light bulb no one had bothered to replace, the same quiet hush. But beneath the surface, the air was charged with something new. I walked confidently toward the executive conference room. Through the glass walls, I saw them, Dad, Lucas, two board members who had once overlooked me in meeting after meeting, and the company attorney, whose polite smile faded the moment he spotted me. Dad rose abruptly, his expression uneasy. Natalie, what's going on? Why didn't anyone tell me you were coming? I calmly set my bag on the table's head and took the seat at the end. No hesitation, no waiting for approval. I didn't need permission anymore. We have matters to discuss, I said evenly. I thought it was best to do this face to face. Lucas gave a sharp laugh. What's this, Natalie? You consulting now? Coming back to poke holes in the company you abandoned? I met his gaze without flinching. No, Lucas. I'm not here as a consultant. I paused, letting the words settle. I'm your new CEO. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dad's face drained of color. What are you talking about? Leaning back slightly, I slid a folder across the table. Here's the acquisition agreement. Hudson Ventures has sold its transportation holdings, including Brooks Freight, to Summit Freight Solutions. Dad's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the papers. You bought the company? Yes, I said softly but firmly. Every contract, every vehicle, every lease. It's all under Summit now. Lucas shot to his feet, his voice sharp. You're lying. There's no way you pulled this off. You don't have that kind of reach. I gave a measured smile. Lucas, it's time you stop underestimating me. That's a mistake that's already cost you everything. He turned to Dad, who sat speechless, staring down at the paperwork like it was written in a language he couldn't read. 6 years ago, I continued, my voice calm, you told me I wasn't capable of leading this company. So I left. And I built something better. I built something of my own. While you were busy with boardroom deals and public appearances, I was creating something solid, I said, my eyes steady on both of them. You didn't just push me away, you handed me the fuel I needed to become unstoppable. Lucas finally sank into his chair, his smirk gone, his hands fidgeting in his lap. So, what's next? You want payback? He asked, voice tight. I gave a small shake of my head. No. I want structure. Starting today, Brooks Freight will begin a complete integration into Summit Freight Solutions. There will be leadership evaluations, department assessments, and likely some reshuffling. But no, Lucas, this isn't revenge. I didn't come back to burn it down. I came back to rebuild it the right way. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the conference room clock. Dad finally spoke, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. You waited all these years, just to embarrass us like this? I met his gaze without flinching. No, Dad. I waited this long to do it right. You taught me patience, how to think before acting. You just never imagined that lesson would circle back to you. He leaned back in his chair, eyes lowered, the fight draining from his face. Then I turned to Lucas. From today forward, you report to me. If that's a problem, I gave a small shrug. There's the door. His jaw tightened, a flicker of resentment in his eyes. So you think you're better than me now? No, Lucas, I said quietly. I've always been better. You just couldn't see it past your own entitlement. There it was the truth, laid bare in the very room where I had once been dismissed, ignored, and shoved into the background. Now I was the one at the head of the table. When the meeting ended, I walked the familiar halls, the ones where I had spent late nights working through problems no one else wanted to touch. Employees peeked cautiously out of doorways, some wide-eyed, others whispering behind half-closed doors. I passed by my old office, the one they had cleared out for Lucas when he'd returned. The same leather chair sat inside, worn but familiar. The same skyline peeked through the window. I didn't feel anger. I felt ready. Ready to take the lead. Ready to heal the fractures. Ready to show them what authentic leadership meant. Because what they tried to strip from me wasn't just a role or a corner office, it was my sense of self. And today, I was claiming it back on my own terms. The quiet woman they once underestimated, the one who stayed late fixing dispatch schedules, now held the keys to the building. And this was just the start. From the outside, the acquisition looked like a clean victory. Industry headlines ran with it. Logistics upstart acquires former regional leader. Board members who'd once overlooked me now offered handshakes and cautious congratulations. Employees who had once walked past me without a glance now offered polite nods. But inside, I could feel the tension. People weren't just surprised, some were wary. Worried I'd turn into a mirror of Lucas, ego-driven, vengeful, ruthless. They didn't know me. Not yet. On my first day as CEO, I skipped the grand speeches. I didn't swap the signage or fire anyone for show. Instead, I sent a simple company-wide message. Meet me in the loading bay at 9 a.m. No titles. No suits. Just us. When I stepped into the warehouse that morning, the entire team was there, from long-haul drivers to accounting staff, from logistics coordinators to senior managers. I climbed onto an old wooden crate, steadied myself, and spoke. I know this change is unexpected. I know many of you have questions, and some of you have ties to the leadership that came before. That's okay. But here's what matters. I didn't come back to break this place. I came back to save it. The reality is, Brooks Freight has been facing serious challenges: rising expenses, outdated systems, high staff turnover, and lost opportunities, I said, standing before the crowd in the loading bay. You know this better than anyone. You've been here through it all. You kept this place running. That shows me one thing: you care. I took a slow breath, looking across the faces of drivers, dispatchers, mechanics, and managers. From this moment forward, we will rebuild this company on 3 core values: progress, honesty, and respect. We won't win back our clients with promises, we'll win them back with results. And if you're willing to roll up your sleeves, embrace change, and believe in what we can achieve together, I promise you, we will rise again. For a heartbeat, the room was still. Then, from the back, someone began to clap. Slowly, more hands joined in until the space filled with quiet but determined applause. It wasn't loud or showy, but it was real. And for me, that was enough. In the following weeks, I set out to keep every commitment I had made. The first step was reviewing every corner of the company, not to assign blame, but to truly understand what was working and what wasn't. I sat down with every department head, including the overnight dispatcher who remembered me from my earliest days as an intern. I reinstated benefits that had been stripped away during Lucas's tenure. I redesigned the driver bonus system, focusing on safety and consistency rather than just volume. And I reopened the innovation center I had once proposed, the very idea Dad had rejected years ago as too expensive. One afternoon, while sorting through dusty old budget reports, I came across a margin note in my own handwriting from years back. If they just let me, I could triple efficiency in 18 months. I smiled quietly to myself because now I didn't need anyone's approval. Lucas, meanwhile, struggled. He had reluctantly agreed to report to me, likely hoping he could wait me out and reclaim his old power. But when the foundation shifts, ego collapses fast. Team members stopped turning to him for decisions. Clients began asking for meetings with me instead of him. Vendors who once tolerated his sharp tone now sent notes like, "Thrilled to see Natalie at the helm. Let us know how we can help with the new direction." And Dad Dad stayed away. For nearly 2 weeks, his office sat empty. When he finally returned, it was quiet, almost tentative. He walked past my open door a few times before finally pausing in the doorway one afternoon. "You've changed," he said quietly, his hands in his pockets. I met his gaze. "No," I answered calmly. "You just never saw me clearly." He shifted his feet, glancing at the floor, then back at me. "You were always brilliant at the work. I just didn't think you had the stomach for leadership." "Maybe," I said gently. "But maybe you confused grace with weakness. Or patience with passivity." He didn't reply. He just gave a slow nod and stepped away. That would be the last meaningful exchange we'd have. A month later, I signed a contract that secured the largest client in the company's history, the same account Lucas had chased for years without success. The deal included a 5-year partnership and projected an additional $22 million in annual revenue. At the signing event, the client's CEO shook my hand warmly and said, "We've followed your journey for some time, Natalie. We admire the way you lead, quiet resolve, smart moves. That's rare these days." And in that moment, I understood something profound. I had never needed to shout to be noticed. I had only needed to stop waiting for permission. What Dad and Lucas never grasped was that true strength doesn't come from titles or a name on the door. It comes from knowing who you are and holding to that even when no one else recognizes your worth. Because the people they underestimate? We're the ones who stay late, who solve the hard problems, who remember the cracks in the foundation because we were the ones patching them all along. And when the moment finally comes, we don't just take over. We rebuild. Better. Stronger. Unshakable. We are the ones who arrive early, stay late, and remember every loose board and missed opportunity because we were the ones patching it all together. And when the moment finally arrives, we're the ones who rebuild stronger, smarter, and better. A year went by, then another, under my leadership. Brooks Freight didn't just recover, it was transformed. We overhauled workflows, introduced predictive routing software, expanded into cross-border freight, and launched a sustainability program that reduced our carbon footprint and earned us 3 major environmental awards. The same company that once labeled me too behind the scenes was now being asked to share insights at conferences on innovation and female leadership in an industry still largely dominated by men. But what marked my return wasn't loud success. It was quiet authority. I didn't strut through the office flashing my title. I didn't remind anyone of what they once said or how they treated me. I didn't have to. The same people who once passed me in the hall without a glance now came to me for guidance. Their respect wasn't bought, it was earned. As for Lucas, he hung on for 9 months before announcing he was leaving to explore new ventures. But the truth was simple: leadership isn't a birthright. It's not inherited like an old watch or a family name. It's something you live and breathe, something that either draws people in or pushes them away. Without someone behind him to smooth the rough edges, Lucas stumbled. Slowly, staff stopped seeking him out. Customers asked to meet with me. Vendors who once put up with his posturing now sent notes like, "Thrilled to see Natalie in charge. Let us know how we can support the transition." Dad never officially stepped down. But his absence spoke volumes. He stopped coming in, leaving behind a corner office that grew quieter each week. I think part of him couldn't bear to walk the halls of a company that no longer reflected his image, but mine. We kept in touch, occasionally. Holidays mostly. Our conversations were polite, almost rehearsed, as if we were family by name only, not by connection. One Thanksgiving, across the long dining table where silverware clinked against plates and quiet laughter drifted between bites, Dad leaned toward me. "I didn't think you had it in you," he said softly, his eyes tired, but not unkind. "But you proved me wrong." I didn't answer. Because I hadn't done it to prove anything to him. I'd done it to reclaim the part of myself that had been buried under years of being passed over, underestimated, and boxed in. Summit Freight, the company I'd launched from a small office over a bakery, was thriving. With a brilliant COO overseeing day-to-day operations, Summit grew alongside Brooks Freight. But now, they weren't rivals. They were partners, part of a shared vision I was shaping. Just last week, I stood under the lights of a logistics summit stage, facing an audience of hundreds. Behind me, the screen read, "The future is female, driving innovation in a changing world." Funny, isn't it? 5 years ago, I couldn't even get a seat at the boardroom table. Now, I was on stage, asked to teach others how to lead. As I spoke, I didn't highlight the eye-catching headlines or the biggest contracts. I didn't rattle off growth metrics or acquisitions. I told the truth. I told them how I'd been told I wasn't enough, that I lacked vision, that I was too cautious, too technical, too quiet. And maybe I was all those things. But here's the secret. The quiet ones, we see everything. We remember it all. And when we rise, we don't just claim power, we change what it means to hold it. Leadership isn't about volume or ego. It's about listening, understanding, and building something that lasts, something anchored in purpose. When I finished, the applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was steady, warm, and genuine. And in that moment, it wasn't for me alone. It was for every woman, every underdog, every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. Afterward, a woman approached me near the stage. Late 30s, sharp eyes, a hesitant smile. "I'm going through a family transition," she said quietly. "They're handing the company to my brother. I've done everything right, but it doesn't matter." I smiled gently, feeling a wave of recognition. "Build your own," I told her softly. "And when they least expect it, come back and buy theirs." Because here's the truth no one tells you. Sometimes you'll never get the apology you deserve. Sometimes the people who dismissed you will never say, "I'm sorry." And that's okay. Because the most powerful apology isn't in words, it's in recognition. It's in the shift in their eyes when they finally grasp what they threw away. It's in the silence after the storm you didn't create but ultimately conquered. I don't hate my father. I don't envy my brother. I wish things had been different. I wish they had seen me for who I was from the start. But if they had, maybe I would have never become who I am now. And I love who I've become. A creator. A leader. A woman who took everything meant to break her and used it as fuel to rise. So, if you're reading this, wondering if it's too late to reclaim what was taken from you, hear me now, it's not. Start small. Start quietly. But start. Because one day, they'll look up and you'll be the one at the head of the table. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you, not just for listening to my story, but for feeling it with me. And now, I ask something from you. If my journey has resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you weren't enough, share your thoughts below. Tell me what part of this story hit home for you. Let's create a space where we lift each other up, where we remind one another that setbacks don't define us, how we rise afterward does. I invite you to leave a comment not just for me, but for the countless people who will read this and realize they're not alone. Your words could be the encouragement someone else needs today. What lesson did you take from this? What have you reclaimed in your own life? Share it. Let's build a conversation that echoes far beyond this moment. And if you're sitting in your own quiet storm right now, if you're feeling dismissed, undervalued, or invisible, here's my advice to you, from one survivor to another. Start. Start small. Start when no one's watching. Start even when your hands shake and your voice wavers. You don't need anyone's permission to reclaim your worth. Build your own thing, brick by brick, and when the time comes, don't aim to crush those who doubted you, aim to rise so high they have no choice but to look up. Remember, real power doesn't come from titles or applause. It comes from knowing who you are and standing firm in that truth. And when you rise, when you stand in your light, you won't just change your life, you'll light the way for others too. So stand tall. I'm cheering for you.